On Life and Meaning is brought to you by Blumenthal Performing Arts, celebrating its 25th year presenting the best in performing arts, sharing and employing the arts as a major catalyst to strengthen education, building community cohesiveness, and advancing economic growth. To discover the best in events and performances, visit blumenthalarts.org.
I think artists have a way of helping us see things more honestly, and they challenge us all the time also about the way they see things and the way we might perceive the world, and that's always healthy. It might be uncomfortable, but it's also really healthy, and can open up all sorts of perspectives. And so I think that the artists really advance us. They advance our civilizations, they advance our thinking, they advance us as individuals, they make us feel more connected and more empathetic, and I think ultimately they just make us a healthier society.
Suzanne Fetscher creates spaces for artists to change the world. For 18 years, she served as the founding president of the McColl Center for Art and Innovation, a contemporary art and artist-in-residency center in Charlotte, North Carolina. Prior to her appointment, she served for 5 years as executive director of the Atlantic Center for the Arts in New Smyrna Beach, Florida. She spent several postgraduate years teaching design and drawing, serving as adjunct instructor at Rollins College and at the University of Central Florida, and as a full-time visiting instructor at Stetson University. In this episode, we explore her career in arts administration and a story of arriving full circle in life. I'm Mark Paris, and this is On Life and Meaning. Suzanne, thanks for joining us.
I'm happy to be here, Mark. Thank you for inviting me.
You have just retired as president and CEO of the McColl Center for Art and Innovation. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
How do you feel?
I feel great. Absolutely excited. Yeah.
What's the transition been like for you?
Oh, it's been complicated, of course, or complex, maybe is a better way to say it. It was very hard after 19 and a half years to make the decision to retire. Obviously, I'm the founding president and CEO, so it's an organization that is near and dear to my heart, and I really feel like it's one of my children, or it is my child. But the organization itself is 18 years old, and it's time to let it become its adult self without me hovering. So I thought it was the right moment for me to step aside and let somebody else come in now and help take it to its full adult, mature self as an organization, and somebody with, lots more energy now and new ideas and really thinking about the future and how to align the organization and its mission in a really healthy way so that it can really succeed even more and sustain itself as an organization. So it's a long answer that it was a hard decision to make, and then once after I made the announcement, getting through then the transition, which was 6 months. It was hard being there and knowing that my days were numbered and that things were going to go on without me, and that I wasn't going to be there. That was very painful, actually.
How are you feeling emotionally about not showing up at the office every day?
I actually am feeling okay about it. There's sadness that I'm not there with my incredible colleagues and around artists every day, and incredible donors and board members. I am actually really excited to have the relief of not having that stress every day, not having to get up early with an alarm clock and go to bed late because I often had receptions in the evenings or events that I needed to go to. So the days were long and often really stressful. So I really don't mind not having those days anymore. I miss the people. That's the hard part. In fact, I just came from McColl Center. I was there doing some studio visits, and I got to visit with the team. And at one point, I said, I have to say goodbye now because otherwise I'm going to get teary because the team is so fantastic. Yeah.
You used an interesting word before. You used the word painful. What has been painful about it?
That part of knowing this is something that I poured myself into for the last 20 years. Every cell in my body and my being, I just poured into that place. It really was my identity and my goal for the 24 hours a day. And knowing that it was now going to have its own existence without me, and I wasn't going to be there to help shape it. That, in fact, it didn't really even need me anymore, that somebody else could come in and take over and lead it in a really fantastic way, and that I wouldn't be a part of it. And one of my last senior staff meetings that we had, I said that I was going to really miss the organization, and one of the team members said, but you're going to come back, you're going to be here all the time. And I said, well, I'll come back, but it won't be the same, because I won't have helped produce it. I will come back as a participant, but I won't be here helping shape it and understanding all of the underlying elements that went into shaping it and making it happen. So that's the painful part.
Is there a bittersweetness already in retirement?
Oh, well, I wouldn't say, no, there's no bittersweetness. It was absolutely the right time. I feel really good about it. More than anything, I am grateful. I am grateful for the opportunity that I had there. I cannot believe that I was given that opportunity. It was such an incredible moment for me to be able to step into that role. And I met so many wonderful people. The relationships over 20 years have been remarkable with artists and with community members, with, national colleagues. I will always treasure that, and they stay with me. I continue to meet with a lot of those same people and have dinner with them and coffee with them and all of that. So they've become important in my life, not just in my work life, but important in my life going forward.
For those who are not familiar with the McColl Center for Art and Innovation, can you talk about what it is, its mission, what made it unique?
Its mission, if I can remember the mission statement accurately, its mission is to empower artists to advance contemporary art and community through the creative process. And at its core, it's an artist-in-residence program. And an artist-in-residence program is really about research and development for artists. And a lot of people don't know that most artists have day jobs, right? They have to earn their living in some other way, and then they make their art in their spare time. But for artists, spare time is also hard to come by, like it is for all of us. And so they really struggle to be able to make their work. And yet the work is so terrific and so important that these residency programs now exist in order to help them have some more supported time so that they can do their work.
There are residency programs for artists around the country.
Oh, yes. It's actually quite a big field. There are about 500 residency programs around the United States.
What are the unique features of McColl?
Most of the residency programs are more rural retreat kind of settings. So it's really about going off into the woods, being with a small group of people, other artists who are also there to do their work, and you really are working in an undistracted kind of setting. It's to get you out of your normal environment where you have distractions of everyday life, and you're put into another retreat kind of setting where you just do your work and other people help take care of your daily needs, right? And you've got your studio space. And it's sort of insular or introverted kind of program. McColl Center is a retreat, but it's more of an urban retreat. So we invite artists from all over the world to be in residence, and we give them a spectacular studio to work in this Gothic Revival church right uptown Charlotte. But because we're an urban residency program, we've also designed into it that there is some public engagement. There's some community engagement expectation of all of the artists. They're not just going off in the woods, they're coming to a new community. So how can we leverage the artists and the kind of work that they do to help engage the community around that work and introduce them to the community, but also can the community help them in any way advance their work in other ways that they couldn't necessarily advance on their own?
The McColl Center was originally the Tryon Center
Yes.
for the Arts.
Yes.
What is the origin of the McColl Center? How did it come about, and what was its original vision?
So when I was recruited to come here to start McColl Center, the building hadn't just been going under construction. So I had a set of blueprints to look at. It was just the 4 exterior walls. And our offices were at Spirit Square, right? We didn't have any place. That was our home, our temporary home. And there was a board of directors, but no staff. And so the very first generic name given to it, the no name, was the Visual Arts Organization. The Arts and Science Council was managing this visual arts organization till they could hire me, right? Or hire a director. And then it was the director's purpose to give it some shape. They knew they wanted it to be an artist-in-residence program, an artist colony. They also wanted it to have some opportunities for local artists to be engaged, right? Professional advancement kind of things. And they wanted it to have an exhibition program. So in some ways it actually was the marriage of 2 other organizations that were in town. When Spirit Square was still active as a cultural organization, there was an organization called Context, which was like a professional development organization support group for artists. And then there was an exhibition program, right? Oh, actually, I have to add a third. Clayworks. Clayworks was part of that as well. And so the artist colony element was added to that, but that all became the parts of McColl Center. We started as a visual arts organization through lots of focus groups and really thinking about what is the unique opportunity here in Charlotte, how was a residency program going to fold into that, and how could it be unique, not be just a replication of all the other artist-in-residence programs in the United States. What could be really differentiating qualities for this particular program for Charlotte to have, and why Charlotte then? So we did a lot of roundtable conversations with artists. We brought in people from around the country who were involved in residency programs, including the director of the Alliance of Artist Communities at the time, to help advise us on what niche could we fill that isn't readily available for artists in residency programs yet. So all of those elements were folded into the consideration of what it should look like and what kind of shape should it have. So we opened actually we opened a year and a half after I got here, and we worked with Blue Choir George Andrews. Clay Andrews was on our board at the time, and instrumental with us coming up with our name, which was Tryon Center for Visual Art, because we were on Tryon Street, and that was becoming this cultural corridor, if you will. And Hugh McColl at that point was still CEO of Bank of America, although he had announced his retirement. We had asked at that point, before we named our organization, whether he would be okay if we named it McColl Center for Visual Art, because he was the patron who made it possible, who identified this visual arts and artist-driven mission for its purpose, and funded, the building, the $7 million for the building to actually be the location, the home for the residency program and exhibition program. But at that time, because he was still CEO of Bank of America, he said no, he did not want have his name on it. But a year and a half later, 2 years later, after he retired from the bank, we had a big party, I think. I'm trying to remember what anniversary it was. It was only a few years later that we changed the name then to McColl Center. I think it was actually in honor of his retirement. We changed the name to McColl Center for visual art.
Suzanne, how did you come to be hired? How did you, and why were you, do you think, selected to take on that task?
Interesting. I was the director of another artist-in-residence program in Florida, in New Smyrna Beach, Florida. And I had been there for 8 years. The last 5 years I'd been executive director. And during that 5 years, we built 6 new buildings. And it's a multidisciplinary artist-in-residence program. So we had visual artists and writers and composers and dancers, theater artists. So we built 6 new buildings, including a black box theater and a dance studio, a sculpture studio, a painting studio, and a music rehearsal and recording studio with and then a library. So it was a really huge undertaking, and it was very, very exciting to be a part of. It won a national AIA award for design. Really spectacular contemporary building set in this 70 acres on the tidal estuary in Florida. It was really, really beautiful. And at that same time, I was also the chair of the Alliance of Artist Communities board. So I was very involved nationally, and I was also involved internationally in the Res Artis board, which is the international consortium of artists in residence programs, going to annual meetings with them and very active with the national organization. So I think it was through all of that, the search firm here in Charlotte was talking to people at the Alliance and saying, okay, who's doing, interesting work around the United States?
Why would you leave a mature and exciting organization with all of those resources in Florida to come to essentially a startup organization here?
Well, and it was a really fantastic experience at Atlantic Center. I have to tell you, in some ways, it was an amazing. Edward Albee was on my national board, Tricia Brown, amazing people who I would, talk with on the phone and get advice from, and who would meet once a year, either at Atlantic Center or we would meet in New York. And so amazing people that I got to hang around with. But at the same time, my background is the visual arts. I have an MFA in printmaking in the visual arts. And so while I loved the exposure of all of these different disciplines, I felt at times like I was a dilettante, like I didn't really know that much about each of them. So I felt like I was out of my bounds, right? Out of my area of expertise. Thank God I had Edward Albee and Tricia Brown, so obviously I had the experts to rely on, but still, the idea of being able to come to Charlotte to start a program that was going to have a depth to it just in the visual arts, to me was really, really intriguing. Plus, the element that excited me the most at Atlantic Center was their community engagement. Before I became executive director, I was in the program department and program director. And I got to go with the artists on their outreaches that I arranged, but they would go all over the state. And I got to see the interaction of these artists with the community and how much the community loved meeting these artists and learning about their practice and their lives. And it was so invigorating to me every time I got to do that. So the idea of having an urban residency program that was going to be all the visual arts, that there were going to be this building 30,000 square feet of studios. All of those 6 new buildings at Atlantic Center that we built, the total square foot was like 12,000 square feet. It wasn't that big. They were small, relatively small studios. This was going to be 30,000 square feet, just visual arts, and it was going to be really spectacular studios. And obviously, Hugh McColl raised an endowment for us. We were going to start with a $6.5 million endowment. I was at Atlantic Center, and it was a 20-year-old organization, and they had like a $2 million endowment. So there were lots of things that were very appealing to the opportunity here, even though it was startup. It scared the heck out of me, but it's also like, okay, it's going to be really, really hard work, but it's also going to be really exciting to do something from scratch.
In the now 20 years that you've been at McColl, is there 1 or 2 significant milestones that come to mind?
Gosh, one of the things I'm most proud of. I mean, there are lots of things, obviously, but one of the things I'm really proud of that we did at McColl Center was a program that is also one of my babies, is the Innovation Institute. And that was really based on the context of Charlotte. Here we are, this extraordinary organization with artists coming, really talented, smart artists coming from all over the world. Here in uptown Charlotte, a few blocks from the headquarters of some Fortune 500 companies, and a lot of companies saying that they want to be more innovative or want to be creative and not knowing how to do it, or claiming that they are, but not really saying that they're delivering on that. So I thought, how could we possibly create a relationship with these companies whereby artists could help them address innovation and creativity in their cultures and help them succeed in that way. And it was also, at the same time, I don't know if you remember Richard Florida's book, The Rise of the Creative Class. Well, his whole premise was that companies were moving their headquarters to Austin, Texas, or San Francisco, or these creative hubs, if you will, because that's where the creative talent was. They were moving their headquarters to those cities so that they could hire creative talent. And I thought about that, and I thought, well, that's in many respects idiotic because they've got talent in their companies. Everybody's creative. Everybody has a creative capacity. They just need to mine that creative capacity, and they need to create a culture that can help them really bring that creativity to life. And instead of building all sorts of barriers and restrictions for that creativity to be squelched, really help people understand that they've got this creative capacity to offer the organization or the company. And who better to have them lead that than artists? We have this incredible intellectual and creative capital at McColl Center. Let's align this with them. And so I was also hoping, of course, that it would be a revenue generator for the organization. So it would be a great synergy that way too. The companies would spend money to have their associates have this kind of training.
Well, it is a bold and exciting idea. Then there's the execution of it.
Right.
How is the Innovation Institute doing?
Well, we had 3 years where thankfully, the North Carolina Arts Council gave us some seed money, and we were getting really great feedback. Lots of amazing people participated in it. They really took the leap and committed 6 days to it. The initial program was 6 days long, and it was every other Friday over 3 months. So it was a huge time commitment. And it wasn't cheap either, so they were committing both time and financial resources to it. And we got incredible feedback. And then we got a huge contribution from the Knight Foundation. It was $1 million contribution over 3 years that could help us then hire an executive director to really build it out. And that was in 2008, when the economy crashed and all the HR budgets were slashed. So there was no more training going on with any companies. They were laying off people and they were cutting all their expenses. So thank God we had the Knight Foundation money to help us make it through that time. And we ended up working with a lot of nonprofits and helping their leadership, because we could fund the programs for them essentially, and helping their leadership really traverse, if you will, this economic difficult situation. And so we survived it, but it was tough. And then we really ended up having to reconfigure it because the 6 days was too much time to expect. It was sort of a new world after the Great Recession, and companies were not spending money like they used to spend on HR, even at the high executive level.
Let's pick up on that thread. It's 2017 now.
Yeah.
Almost 10 years have gone by since the recession. But museums, art institutions of all sorts are under stress around the country.
Yeah.
It's a very different time for arts administration than it was when you started at McColl 20 years ago.
Absolutely it is, yeah.
What's happening?
I think the whole world is changing so quickly around us. Everything is changing. The way we receive our news, the way that we do our banking, the way that we shop, everything, we're doing things differently now. And I think our older institutions are trying to understand, what does that mean for them, right? How do you engage people in a way that is going to be meaningful? And institutions like museums and McColl Center relying on contributions, people are making different choices perhaps, and philanthropy isn't necessarily something that is always being passed on generationally, and philanthropy is something that is usually a learned behavior. It's not something that you typically just pick up and do because you want to. It's because your parents did it or other mentors or coaches did it, and they encouraged you to investigate it and to do it too. It's the right thing to do, besides it being something that provides you a lot of personal benefit, personal value in terms of how it makes you feel, right? So I think institutions are really struggling with how does this new world relate to their missions, and how do they deliver on their mission in a way that really engages people deeply.
It also seems that for decades, if not centuries, what distinguished one museum or art institution from the other was its square footage, its physical assets, the experience it gave to people walking through the door. And now all of those things are capital costs and operating costs and burdens, and what was once an asset is now a liability.
And it's become all very, very expensive to have all of those things. It really is. Buildings get old. And even at McColl Center, that 30,000 square foot building, it is something that you always have to worry about, maintaining it. A lot of museums are putting their collections online, and there was controversy, early on about that people won't come anymore. In actuality, it actually draws more people in because they see something, and then they see something online, and then they actually want to see it in real life. So they will make the effort to get there. So as opposed to undermining an organization mission, it actually helps promote the mission and get more people involved. But those are all tests, case sort of scenarios that you have to investigate. There's a lot of prototyping going on, I would say, with institutions trying to figure out what's a hook in a good way to get people engaged. And maybe it's got a social or a food or a craft beer or bring your dog or yoga or, some sort of element that can be accessible and easy and fun. And then you also have folded into it these other really deeper sort of mission and content kind of experiences.
Do you think this is an opportune time to retire from arts administration? or do you feel like, oh my gosh, we're going through a particularly exciting and disruptive period and I wish I was in it?
Well, that's a really good question. Yes, to both. I feel in some ways that it was time for me to move on, and that it is a right time for somebody new to come in with lots of energy and ideas about this. I was feeling somewhat depleted. I really always felt like I could understand what we needed to do next. And whether it was just a matter of being tired, being burnt out, or that it was really just that a new leadership is needed. It was something along those lines, though, that made me realize I think it was time for me to step aside. But in actuality, I also think that having been gone now for a couple months, it's sort of like, I still have a lot of energy and I do have a lot of ideas. Maybe it's not there. Maybe I just need a new set of challenges to put my time and energy into my ideas. So I still feel like I've got lots to offer, but change is good. And McColl Center needs a whole nother set of approaches to things, and they're definitely going to be doing a lot of prototyping, and we have been actually over the last 1.5 or 2 years doing some prototyping. But I think it's going to take 5 years for organizations to make this kind of transition, because there's huge transition going on. Social media. It seems that people are just following the big attention grabbing kind of events on social media. That's where everybody shows up. So how do you compete with that as an institution that's got regular programming? I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how it all evolves.
Suzanne, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Minnesota, St. Cloud, Minnesota.
What was that like for you?
It was pretty spectacular. I grew up in a big family. There's 7 kids in my family. I'm the middle child. It was The town itself is very, very Catholic. It's German, but also a lot of Scandinavians in Minnesota. And everybody in my neighborhood had 5 kids and 7 kids and 9 kids. It was crazy, but it was a lot of fun. So we were always outside playing. It didn't matter if it was snowing or if it was in the summer.
What was your maiden name?
Smith. I was Susie Smith growing up. Yes. So yeah, I changed it to Fetscher, which now I have to spell all the time for people.
Susie Smith.
Susie Smith, yeah.
Talk to me about your parents.
Very sort of middle class, working class people. My mom and dad, or my dad and his brother, inherited from their father a business and a heating oil and gas station business in Minnesota. So they ended up selling the company when my father was like 45 years old. And we moved to Florida at that point. And my father became an entrepreneur, and he had a couple companies down there that he started.
How old were you?
I was 15 and a half. So we moved when I was a sophomore in high school, and we moved at Christmas time. So it was essentially a blizzard the day we left Minnesota in December, and we had a warm Christmas in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It was definitely culture shock getting there. And
how did you adjust?
I'm scarred for life. No, it was really hard, at that time of my life, right, to be torn away from my friends in high school and all of that. But of course, you recover, and it ends up being a really important experience in your life and opens up new worlds. And, the center of the universe was not St. Cloud, Minnesota, I realized. And yeah, it was a wonderful experience. I ended up living in Florida for over 30 years, but with that said, I was really glad to get out of Florida, and I was glad to come to North Carolina. So that was the other part of the equation of being recruited up here, was sort of like, yeah, North Carolina would be a fantastic place to live. And Charlotte I had actually heard of and knew about Harvey Gantt, actually. I had invited Harvey Gantt to come to Florida to serve as a speaker for a program I put together there. So it was a strange, interesting confluence.
Well, we have that in common because I came here 20 years ago from Fort Lauderdale.
Oh, I forgot that, well. Mark. Oh, I forgot.
And we cross similar paths in Central Florida, too.
That's right, exactly. Yeah. Rollins College in Winter Park.
Well, where did you go to college?
I went to the University of Central Florida for my undergraduate degree and the University of Florida for my MFA.
And what did you study undergrad?
Also art, studio art. Yeah.
And why were you drawn to that?
It was an accident. I never thought that I had an artistic sort of bent. My mom put us in art classes when I was little. We used to go to Saturday art classes, and I loved it, but I never thought I was particularly talented in it. But when I enrolled at UCF, my guidance counselor asked me what I wanted to do as an elective, and I wasn't sure. At that point, I was a general studies major. I didn't know what I wanted to major in. And she or he said, well, why don't you take this design class? And I said, okay, I'll take that. That sounds good. I didn't have any idea really what it was going to entail. And I took it, and I loved it. I worked so hard in it. I was consumed by it. I was always thinking about the projects that we had to do and what would be the really best solution for them. I had a great time, but at the end of it, I got an A, but I thought, oh my God, that was so much work. I must not be innately talented. It was so much work. I'm sure it was so much easier for everybody else. And I showed my portfolio to somebody, and they said, these are really great. You need to take another class. And I said, really? You think so? I said, absolutely. You need to take something else. So I took a drawing class, and then I was hooked.
You were a visual artist.
I was a visual artist.
What would we have seen in your portfolio?
Oh, gosh. A lot of still life, a lot of abstract work as well, a lot of monoprints and things like that. I ended up majoring in printmaking and then went to the University of Florida also in printmaking.
Are you still a visual artist today?
Not really, although a few years ago I was doing a little bit of painting. But I don't know. Maybe I'll take some of it up as I retire. My sister, from retirement gift, gave me an artist journal and a set of charcoal and pen and pencil. Pen and pencil and erasers and stuff like that. So we'll see. Maybe I'll take some up when I'm in Germany.
Well, this is a little-known fact about you, although many people who are close to you clearly know this, but as a student, you met someone who changed your life.
Yes, I did.
What is that story, Suzanne?
And he's actually the one who told me, you should take another class in art because you're really good. My husband. Yeah, and he was one of my professors at the university, but just divorced, so we didn't date till after the semester was over.
How old were you?
I was 19 when we started dating.
And my understanding is he's 22 years older than you.
He is 22 years older
So
than me.
here you are, a 19-year-old,
Yes.
dating a professor who's 22 years older than you.
Yes.
What was that all about?
I don't really know what it was all about, but I was certainly attracted to him, and he's from Germany, and he taught history class, intellectual history. So it was cultural history, history of ideas, and it was Marx and Hegel and Kant and all of those, which I loved, all of those ideas and all of those thinkers in that time. And so that was really intriguing to me. I don't know, there was just something about him that was like, this guy's really interesting. I would love to have some conversations with him, just to get to know him better. And, lo and behold, of course, he asks me out at the end of the semester. And was like, yeah, sure. I'd love to have a date. My parents were not happy about it. I let them know when he asked me out. I called my mom and I said, I just want you to know my professor invited me on a date and I'm going and I'm really excited about it. And my mom said, fine. But then as we continued to date, my parents were not happy about it. And at one point, they were paying for my apartment and my tuition and all of that and my car. And probably like a year into this relationship with Elmar, my mom said to me, we don't want you seeing him anymore. We are not going to pay your college tuition if you keep seeing him. You need to transfer up to the University of Florida, because they were living in Ocala at the time. And I said, fine. And that weekend, we rented a U-Haul trailer. We hooked it onto the back of Elmar's car. We unloaded my apartment, filled the U-Haul trailer with all my furniture, drove up to my parents' house on a Sunday morning, unloaded the U-Haul trailer into their garage. I dropped off my car and I handed them the keys and I got into his car and I moved in with him.
Was there a breach in your relationship with your parents?
There was. There was, probably for about 6 months. And I took out a student loan. My sister co-signed my student loan for me. My parents were so upset with her for doing that. And I paid my own way then, the rest of my college education. And probably a year or so later, I called my mom and dad and I said, Elmer and I have decided to get married. And they said, fine, we'll give you a wedding. So it was like, if we were going to make that kind of commitment to each other, they were going to accept it. So we were having breakfast or dinner or something with my mom and dad before we got married, but right around that time. And my dad said, what would you like as your wedding present? And I said, I would like you to pay off my student loans. And I am going to graduate school, and I'd like you to pay my tuition for graduate school and my books. And they said, fine. So that was pretty amazing.
How did his family and his colleagues perceive the relationship?
His colleagues always were very accepting of me. I don't know why and how, but they were very generous in that way. I think that Elmar didn't date co-eds otherwise, right? So he didn't have that kind of reputation, right? And so I think that they respected him, and I think they respected me. They always treated me very well, very respectfully. And his family they adored me and I adored them. We always immediately had a great relationship. And we would visit his sister in Sarasota. And I got to know his mom because she visited quite a bit in Florida. And so that was never a problem at all. And when we got married, this is an interesting story too. We got married in March, so March 11th is our anniversary. We got married on Saturday, and that following Wednesday.
The Ides of March.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We got married on Saturday, and that following Wednesday, we left for Germany for 6 months. My husband's from Germany, and he had a sabbatical, and he was doing research for a book. And we lived with his mom. And she didn't really speak much English, so I learned German pretty quickly. But it was a fantastic experience, a fantastic 6 months. And he wrote his book and got it published and all of that. It was a really productive time. And what a wonderful honeymoon, if you will, of going to Germany for 6 months. So my husband and I, to celebrate my retirement now from McColl Center, are going to Germany in January for 6 months, and in March we'll celebrate our 40-year wedding anniversary. So 40 years later, we're back, and we're staying right next door to where Elmar's mom used to live. So there's this wonderful, this very beautiful full circle that we're enjoying right now.
You speak German.
I do speak German.
Do you and Elmar speak German to each other?
We not so much, a little bit at home here, but when we get on the plane to Germany, this is always what we do when we go, because we typically go for a month. We get on the plane in Charlotte, we start speaking German, and we only speak German while we're there until we get on the plane to come back, and then we speak English.
How did you and Elmar navigate your careers given the age difference? Did you have an agreement or understanding as to whose careers would take priority?
That's a really interesting question. And it wasn't really an agreement, but there was sort of an ebb and flow that happened in our relationship based on what each of us was doing, right? And where we needed to focus our energies together or separately, right? Elmar was very deeply involved in publishing and research when we first got married. And I was still in school, or going to graduate school. And when I went to graduate school, it was at the University of Florida, but we lived in Orlando. So I would go and I would stay with my mom and dad in Ocala Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and do all of my classroom work that I needed to do that first year of graduate school. And then I would go back home to Orlando. And I could still work at the University of Central Florida, their studio. They allowed me to use the studios there to do my graduate work, studio work. So it was, a wonderful system of organizing. So Elmar really got a lot of his own research and writing done because I was busy doing graduate school, right, and gone much of the time. And then after graduate school, for 5 years or so, I was an adjunct instructor. So I was at UCF or Rollins College teaching studio classes. And so we were pretty much home based, but I could also go then in the summer to Germany with Elmar so he could continue to do research and writing. And for the first 10 years that we were married, we spent 8 summers in Germany. So that was really focused on his career and just my trying to get some professional career going after graduate school. And then I got a job at Graphic Studio at the University of South Florida, which is in Tampa. And that was more of a full-time job, and I couldn't just do it on a 9-month basis. So that became more of a priority for me. And I was there Monday through Friday and came home on weekends. So that was, a way for me to really focus my professional career. Mm-hmm. And then after that, I got a job at Atlantic Center.
Suzanne, when you look at art, what do you look for?
What do I look for? I look for ideas, and I look for some visual engagement, whether it's the materials or the medium or the gesture of the medium, some visual element. But sometimes art can be so conceptual that you have to really understand the idea first, that the artist is really investigating through this work, and then you look at the piece with that in mind, right, to understand how they were expressing it or why they were expressing it.
What makes art good?
That's subjective, of course. Everybody has a different opinion of that.
For 20 years, you've been an executive director at McColl. You've assessed the applications
Well-
of artists who come to the McColl to seek a residency? You've been in this business for your entire professional life. What do you look for? What makes art good?
For me, it's about the ideas more than
Yeah.
anything. What are the ideas that the artist is investigating, and then why is it compelling the way that they're investigating it with these particular set of mediums, whether it's photography or a mound of dirt or whatever it is, why those materials. So what's the idea, and why is that artist investigating that idea? What's the meaningful idea or element in that idea for them?
Has there been a set of ideas that you have come back to, Ben, that kind of reveals what excites you?
And actually that's a really good question, because I am considering those things as I'm trying to figure out what I want to do next. One thing that transpired at McColl Center that was a surprise to me, but also a real sense of value and purpose, is that whole social engagement kind of practice. That artists, many artists nowadays, it's not just about making a piece of art in their own studio, it's about engaging with the community in some way, that the community participates in discovering ways for expression, or even some activism, if you will, that artists might be interested in racial justice, right? So part of their work might be having forums around racial justice and inviting people to talk about. I'll give you an example. This was a long time ago. We had an artist in residence named Colin Quashie, and it was not too long after the O.J. Simpson trial that he was in residence. And we invited him in to be in residence because Charlotte at that time had been somehow ranked like bottom 50 in racial trust, interracial trust, 50 of 50. And so we thought at McColl Center, sort of like, we have to do something about this. We can be part of this solution. We need to raise the level of the conversation around interracial trust. And Charlotte, what? How can Charlotte be having this kind of challenges? And so we invited Colin Quashie to be in residence. And Colin Quashie is an African-American artist in Charleston, former Navy SEAL, and also wrote comedy for a TV show or a TV station. He always wanted to do a book, a coloring book, the O.J. Simpson coloring and activity book, and to do it in a community, because he wanted to try to put sort of a humorous spin on it to make it more comfortable to talk about it. I like to think of him as sort of the African-American Woody Allen. Sort of like there's a real element of content and seriousness here, but if you put a spin on it, it makes people just relax and to really embrace the conversation a little bit more authentically. That's when I realized the unique possibilities of being an urban residency program, and the possibility of giving somebody like Colin Quashie a place to work, but also a way for our community to advance our thinking about some of these issues. And so that changed my whole notion too about art doesn't have to be on the wall. Art isn't just something that you make in isolation. The active part of having these community forums was part of his art form. And it was the way he gathered information for the next body of work that he was going to do.
And that is a theme that's excited you over the years, looking for that community engagement, social activation piece.
Yeah, and how artists can help make a difference in the world, move our society forward. But this unique sort of opportunity here can be more about that social engagement.
Suzanne, during difficult economic times, the value of the arts is often questioned.
Right.
What are your thoughts about that? Should the arts be prioritized in challenging times?
It's very difficult to argue with somebody who is trying to decide where their philanthropic dollars go, right? And they want to be able to support. We've got so many needs in the United States and in our own community. It is hard to make those sorts of decisions. Education, health, just poverty as a serious issue, access and inclusion. I mean, there are just so many LGBT issues. I understand if people need to direct their money to these other causes. We certainly think that the arts add tremendous value to our lives, adding that sense of beauty when we have so much of challenging things going on around us and so much divisiveness. Having the respite of beauty and the respite of how artists are thinking about things also adds great value, and it's really important to support. Everybody has to make their own decisions, but it certainly needs to be one of the prongs of the amenities in a community. So how to make it a healthy prong as well, and not just struggling to survive.
Suzanne, what is the case for the arts for you?
The arts for me it's about sort of a groundedness and a truth and a beauty. It is about honesty and authenticity and integrity of ideas. It's about humanity. It's about the value of all of those elements and celebrating those things. That's what the arts do for me. And I think that's what it can do for everybody. We just need to help people have that way into it so that they can experience it. Not enough people really feel like they can get there and have that kind of experience, but it is there for everybody. So how do we bring it to more people? I think artists have a way of helping us see things more honestly, and they challenge us all the time also about the way they see things and the way we might perceive the world. And that's always healthy. It might be uncomfortable, but it's also really healthy and can open up all sorts of perspectives. And so I think that the artists really advance us. They advance our civilizations. They advance our thinking. They advance us as individuals. They make us feel more connected and more empathetic. And I think ultimately they just make us a healthier society.
What's next for Suzanne Fetscher?
I'm still figuring that out. I'm leaving lots of space for myself right now to see what might happen. That's part of going to Germany, is just separating myself from McColl Center, and that has been my identity for the last 20 years. So I am getting distance on that and trying to reacquaint myself with myself separate from it, and also what are my values, what are the things that really make me happiest, where do I want to spend my time, where don't I want to spend my time, and then aligning myself with that, and then whatever I arrive at, that's where I'll start to look for opportunities when I come back from Germany.
Thank you for spending your time with me today, Suzanne.
Thank you very much, Mark. It was an honor to be here.
Suzanne Fetscher was the founding president of the McColl Center for Art and Innovation, a contemporary art and artist-in-residency center in Charlotte, North Carolina. She earned a BFA in studio art from the University of Central Florida and an MFA in printmaking from the University of Florida. And now, a personal word. Somehow, if I could recover deep data files in my brain, I'm sure there is a fragment memory of having met Suzanne in Florida long before we met in North Carolina. Particularly exploratory REM sleep just might uncover those files. Here's what I do know. Between 1981 and 1985, I attended Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida. Rollins is a small, selective liberal arts college known for, among other things, its water skiing, tennis courts, and spectacularly beautiful Spanish Mediterranean architecture. At the time, it had a quite rigorous history department and students who were exceptional in theater, music, and the arts. It's not every college that has its own fine arts museum, but Rollins did. Near the shores of Lake Virginia was the Cornell Fine Arts Museum, which housed a distinguished art collection from ancient objects to contemporary design. Beside the museum was the college art department, with studios and student exhibition spaces. It's there that during my sophomore year, in 1982, I took Intro to Art and Artists. The perfect story would be to report that Suzanne Fetscher was my teacher years ago while she was an instructor at Rollins, and now, only later in life, did it dawn on both of us. If only I had a photograph of me standing at an easel with Professor Fetscher watching me sketch vibrant lines in charcoal. But no such story to tell. Intro to Art and Artists was an art history class, not studio art. Suzanne Fetscher was not my instructor years ago when she taught art at Rollins. But gosh, I do think I must have said hello, that classmates of mine took classes with her, that she is in the recesses of my memory somewhere. I am sure if I had taken a class with her, she would have created a space for artists to flourish. 17 years after my Intro to Art class, in the summer of 1999, I moved from Fort Lauderdale to Charlotte, about the same time, give or take, that Suzanne moved from New Smyrna Beach to Charlotte. We were both halfbacks, from the north to the south to halfway back to the Carolina Piedmont. My guess is we both had the same sense about Charlotte, that it was orderly, sensible, and future-oriented, in need of a dash of artistic vitality, a good place to make a difference and call home. In the photo album I have of my first few months in Charlotte is a series of photographs taken at an open house in the spring of the year 2000 at the newly opened McColl Center for Visual Art. In one photograph, my wife is creating a giant bubble with a hula hoop for my 2-year-old daughter. We were citizens of a new town participating in one of the city's newest cultural amenities. We had fun that day, checking out the studios and the large industrial arts and crafts machines in the beautiful converted church that is the McColl Center. I don't remember it, but for all I know, I met Suzanne that day too. I am sure if I had met Suzanne that day, she would have told me about the promise of the McColl Center and how artists would flourish and how the community would too. It is now the winter of 2017. Suzanne and I are both a bit older than our days when we were both on the Rollins campus. During the 35 years that has gone by since that time, Suzanne has touched the lives of countless artists, giving them hope and the means and the opportunity to express themselves. She has supported initiatives and developed programs, prototyping and experimenting, leading organizations with the same innovative and creative spirit as the artists she champions. She has done the hard work of envisioning and collaborating and fundraising and allocating that makes an enterprise work. She has advocated and inspired. She has done what all true artists do, bring truth and beauty into the world. This is Mark Paris, and you've been listening to On Life and Meaning. Thank you to my partners Andy Go, producer of the show, and to Chris Curriton, art and media director. This is how you can help. Please write a review on iTunes. It helps us grow our audience. Follow us on Facebook. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. And become a patron. We are on Patreon, a crowdsourcing platform that allows you to support what you value. Visit us also on our website, onlifeandmeaning.com. Thank you for listening.